John chapter 18. Jesus leaves the upper room with his disciples and crosses the Kidron Valley and onto the Mount of Olives, to Jerusalem. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples over the brook Kidron, where was a garden, into which he and his disciples entered. John 18:1. See also Matthew 26:36-27, 26. Mark 14:32-15:15. Luke 22:39-23:12. Jerusalem, in Hebrew, means olive press. This was a favorite spot of Jesus, a usual place to go, as Luke puts it. John does not write much about the Jerusalem experience. We know Jesus spent time in prayer. Jesus knew exactly what was coming, and he encouraged the disciples to pray that they might not fall into temptation. But the disciples were sleepy. Judas, of course, knew the place well. It was there that the betrayer, at least eventually, brought the party who would arrest Jesus. Now Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, for Jesus often resorted there with his disciples. Judas then, having taken a detachment of soldiers and officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, came there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. John 18:2-3. There was quite a crowd. From other gospel writers, we hear of temple police and an armed mob. John tells us of a Roman detachment, a cohort, the 10th part of a legion, 600 troops. No doubt, the high priest wanted to be sure of Jesus' arrest this time. The last time he sent the temple police to arrest Jesus, they didn't do it. They came back saying, "No man ever spoke like Jesus." The Jews likely mucked up the truth a bit in order to get Pilate to order the dispatch of an entire detachment of soldiers. It was dark. Even with the betrayer's signal kiss, see other gospel accounts, it may have been difficult to pinpoint Jesus. Yet, Jesus made it clear who and where he was. For one thing, he wanted them to take him and leave the other disciples alone. Jesus asked very directly, "Who is it you want?" They responded, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus therefore, knowing all the things that were happening to him, went forth and said to them, "Who are you looking for?" They answered him, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus said to them, "I am." Judas also, who betrayed him, was standing with them. When therefore he said to them, "I am," they went backward and fell to the ground. Again therefore he asked them, "Who are you looking for?" They said, "Jesus of Nazareth." John 18:4-7. When Jesus said, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. Literally, Jesus said, "I am," and they were knocked over backwards. More like a lion than a lamb there, I'd say. I think he was just making sure the disciples were safe. It was something like, "Take me, but let these men go." Jesus answered, "I told you that I am. If therefore you seek me, let these go their way, that the word might be fulfilled which he spoke, of those whom you have given me, I have lost none." John 18:8-9. Then there was Peter, always seeming to get into trouble, but meaning to do the right thing. He protected his Lord, and attacked a target of opportunity. Malchus was evidently in range. He sliced off Malchus' ear, but Jesus was set on carrying out the plan that had been drafted in eternity past. See 1 Peter 1:18-20. We find from other accounts that Jesus healed Malchus. I wonder how that affected Malchus. Simon Peter therefore, having a sword, drew it, and struck the high priest's servant, and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus therefore said to Peter, "Put the sword into its sheath. The cup which the Father has given me, shall I not surely drink it?" John 18:10-11. Jesus was arrested. He was brought to Annas. Annas had been high priest from AD 6 to 15. Caiaphas, his son-in-law, was high priest from AD 18 to 36. Though Caiaphas was high priest, Annas likely had an advisory position. John makes it clear that Caiaphas was the high priest, but uses the title for Annas as well in verse 19. We do the same with our out-of-office politicians. So the detachment, the commanding officer, and the officers of the Jews seized Jesus and bound him, and led him to Annas first, for he was father-in-law to Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. Now it was Caiaphas who advised the Jews that it was expedient that one man should perish for the people. John 18:12-14. One of the disciples knew the high priest personally, probably John. He and Peter followed the crowd to the gated residences of the high priest and his family. John was able to enter and got Peter in as well. Simon Peter followed Jesus, as did another disciple. Now the disciple was known to the high priest, and entered in with Jesus into the court of the high priest. But Peter was standing at the door outside. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to her who kept the door, and brought in Peter. Then the maid who kept the door said to Peter, "Are you also one of this man's disciples?" He said, "I am not." Now the servants and the officers were standing there, having made a fire of coals, for it was cold. They were warming themselves. Peter was with them, standing and warming himself. John 18:15-18. Annas questioned Jesus. A sort of pre-trial, I suppose. Jesus always taught in the open. There was no reason to accuse him of sedition. But that was the charge. Sedition and blasphemy. Sedition, because they wanted the death penalty. The high priest therefore asked Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Jesus answered him, "I spoke openly to the world. I always taught in synagogues and in the temple, where the Jews always meet. I said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. Behold, these know the things which I said." When he had said this, one of the officers standing by slapped Jesus with his hand, saying, "Do you answer the high priest like that?" Jesus answered him, "If I have spoken evil, testify the evil. But if well, why do you beat me?" John 18:19-23. In the meantime, Peter denied his Lord 3 times. At the third denial, the rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word the Lord has spoken to him, "Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly. Luke 22:61-62. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. They said therefore to him, "You aren't also one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it, and said, "I am not." One of the servants of the high priest, being a relative of him whose ear Peter had cut off, said, "Didn't I see you in the garden with him?" Peter therefore denied it again, and immediately the rooster crowed. John 18:25-27. After the preliminary questioning, Annas sent him on to Caiaphas at daybreak, we find from Luke, for a trial before the Jewish ruling body, the Sanhedrin. They all asked, "Are you then the Son of God?" He replied, "You are right in saying I am." Then they said, "Why do we need any more testimony? We have heard it from his own lips." Luke 22:70-12. Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. John 18:24. They accused him of saying he was the Christ. He told the truth. He is the Christ, the Son of God, a king. They would need to push the king accusation to get the death penalty. They then led him off to Pilate, since the Romans did not permit them to carry out a death sentence. Pilate therefore went out to them, and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered him, "If this man weren't an evildoer, we wouldn't have delivered him up to you." Pilate therefore said to them, "Take him yourselves, and judge him according to your law." Therefore the Jews said to him, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death, that the word of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying by what kind of death he should die." John 18:29-32. The Jews did not enter the palace of Pilate. To do so would make them ceremonially unclean. They could not then continue the Passover feast. Remember, the Feast of Unleavened Bread immediately followed the Passover and lasted the better part of a week. The entire celebration week became known as the Passover. The Jews wanted to be able to continue with the week-long feast, to eat the Passover. They led Jesus therefore from Caiaphas into the praetorium. It was early, and they themselves didn't enter into the praetorium, that they might not be defiled, but might eat the Passover. John 18:28. Pilate questions Jesus. He asked if Jesus was king of the Jews. Jesus admitted to being a king, though his kingdom was not of this world. Pilate found Jesus to be innocent. He tried to release Jesus, but the Jews were adamant. They wanted Jesus crucified. Pilate therefore entered again into the praetorium, called Jesus, and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered him, "Do you say this by yourself, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate answered, "I'm not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests delivered you to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would fight, that I wouldn't be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here." Pilate therefore said to him, "Are you a king then?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this reason I have been born, and for this reason I have come into the world, that I should testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." John 18:33-37. Pilate, so it would seem, tried several times, and used different methods, to have Jesus released. When he found that Jesus was from Galilee, he sent him to Herod, governor of that region. Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" When he had said this, he went out again to the Jews, and said to them, "I find no basis for a charge against him. But you have a custom that I should release someone to you at the Passover. Therefore do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" Then they all shouted again, saying, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a robber. John 18:38-40. He tried to use the Jewish Passover custom of release, paschal release, with bad guy Barabbas as the other choice. He tried flogging Jesus as a compromise, going out afterwards and again seeking the release of Jesus. Still, it was in his power. He should have let Jesus go. But it was time for the plan to move forward. The plan worked out before the creation of the earth. See, for example, 1 Peter 1:18-20. The end. John chapter 18,